Good evening, and welcome to the very first ever Astrological Themes in Cinema Star Lounge, presented by me, Ursula Duffy, with Sea Goddess Healing Arts. And tonight we are going to look at the film It's a Wonderful Life through the lens of astrology. And I decided to do this tonight on the winter solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere in honor of that, and as well as the fact that this is pretty much a classic holiday film. And Capricorn season begins here tonight at around 10:30 p.m. here on the East Coast. So this film has heavy Capricorn themes, which we'll get into. So I just want to thank everyone that's here with me live, and then everyone in the future who's tuning into the recording for joining me and for helping me make this possible. I'm so excited. When I started learning astrology, I watched this movie again after I had a pretty good understanding of the planets and the signs and everything, and I was just blown away by the symbolism, the way that it demonstrates the Cancer Capricorn axis in particular so perfectly. And every time I watched it again and again, I learned something new. I noticed something different. So just being able to put all this into a class, into a presentation, really helped me organize my thoughts and everything that I've noticed and all the aha moments I've had since I learned astrology, and then have continued watching this, as this is one of my favorite movies, not just for the holiday season, but in general. So thank you all so much for helping me make this happen. So what we'll do tonight is we'll go through some slides that I have compiled and put together, kind of doing the instruction material. And then we'll watch a little clip of the movie, and then we'll go into a Q&A and discussion, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's get started. So I wanted to give a little bit of background on the film itself. And it was actually released for the first time in New York City. The premiere was right before the winter solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere in 1946. So I thought that was pretty cool, interesting synchronicity and timing that just went along with everything that I kind of have gleaned and noticed. And it's a Frank Capra masterpiece, in my opinion. And I just learned this recently, actually, when I was putting together the materials for the class, that it's based on a short story called The Greatest Gift, which was written by Philip Van Doren Stern. And I learned, actually, I got an email. I'm a Rutgers alumni, and I learned in that email that he was actually born in Pennsylvania. He grew up in New Jersey, and he's a Rutgers alumni as well, from the Rutgers campus in Newark, New Jersey in 1924. So that was pretty cool. So he wrote the short story called The Greatest Gift, and there's a link there for anybody that's accessing this after the fact that you can read about it a little bit more. But he wrote the short story, and then that inspired the film. So I just thought that was a really cool synchronicity and connection as well. So these are the general topics that we'll cover tonight. These are the astrological themes that I've noticed in watching this just through my own personal education and experience. I haven't pulled this from anywhere else. This is all just me riffing on all the things that I've learned and observed and gleaned from just watching this after having astrological knowledge and through my own studies. So we'll cover, this film is heavy on Saturnian lessons. Part of the film is actually part of George's Saturn return, and we'll get into that for sure. We'll cover the zodiac signs that I feel the film demonstrates and the archetypes that go with those, as well as the symbols that you can see throughout the film. I have a bunch of screenshots and pictures that I'll cover. The planets that are involved in all of this and the story and how they're symbolized as well, and how they show themselves through the characters. So this film, like I said, is heavy on Saturn lessons. And we all go through Saturn lessons in pretty much perfect divine timing collectively at certain ages, or commonly at certain ages. So the first time we get a Saturn challenge is when we turn 7. The next time is when we turn 14. The next time is when we turn 21. And then the next time is when we turn 2730, which is our first Saturn return. And that's because Saturn works itself around our chart in 30-year increments. So if you divide that by 4, we get increments of 7. So it's commonly, you can think of the phrase, the 7-year itch, or something like that, that really demonstrates the challenges that we all go through at these particular ages and particular times in our lives. And this experience will be flavored differently depending on where Saturn is in your natal chart, what sign it's in, what house it's in, and all of that. So we take that all into account as well. But if you said to me that you were 27, then I would say, oh, you're on the brink of your first Saturn return. And this definitely happens when we're looking at George's life, and pretty much the first entire half of the movie is the story of George's life. So these are the themes that usually come up. Our first Saturn return is usually very much an adulting experience. Even really when it starts around 21, when we get that third challenge before the return. Just think about when you're 21 and what's happening in our lives. Like, typically it's when we're graduating college, we turn legal drinking age here in the United States and all those things. So it's very much an adulting experience that gets carried forward into a really big test when we turn 27, 30. And you've probably heard of the Forever 27 Club. Like, a lot of people don't make it past that 27-year challenge from Saturn. A lot of people opt out at that point, either voluntarily or just that's it. Their life is over at that point. So some of the common overarching themes usually for everybody are, regardless of where your Saturn is, just taking responsibility for yourself, really owning up to what you came here to do on a soul level. Karma usually comes into play in a big way. Saturn is a planet that relates to restriction, and I always relate Saturnian lessons to like getting called into the principal's office. So you really have to own up, you have to face what you did. If you did something, take responsibility for your actions. Saturn can also relate very much to our father and our patrilineal line and our families. So there's that element that comes into play as well, usually, sometimes more so for others. And we'll get into that with George's story as well. So if you're 30, if you're 60, if you're 90, you've been through at least, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're 30, you're in the midst of or have been through at least one Saturn return at this point. So that comes back around at 60, that comes back around at 90. And then if you live past that, then you can experience a fourth. But we all know that that's generally not the case anymore with the human lifespan. So we'll get into it. We'll get into the thick of it for sure. So just based on the information that's given throughout the narration and dialogue and the film and all of that, this is the information and the timeline that I've kind of put together for George's story. So the opening scene is the meeting of the angels in heaven, and Clarence is George's guardian angel, and we'll get into that. But it's said that George is 12 years old in 1919 when we have the opening scene of him sledding on the pond of ice. So that's what they say. So then I was like, okay, that was my first aha. Okay, George was born in 1907, so we can glean that information just from the storyline. And then at the scene where George is sitting at the table with his father, Harry has just graduated, and when we go to the scene of Harry's graduation party, it says the class of 1928. So at that point, we know that Harry's roughly 17, 18 years old. So that means that George, based on the year he was born, is 21. So this is a very pivotal moment in the film because this is the night that George's father dies. This is the night that Peter dies. So interestingly, that it happens when George is 21 years old. I came up with a natal chart for George, so we'll look at that too, because there's definitely a Saturn thing involved with this as well, which we'll get into, but heavy on the Saturn lessons already as George is turning 21. And then at this point, he's had this big trip to Europe planned, and he doesn't get to go because his dad dies, and he chooses to stay and handle the family business for the summer instead. So that's roughly 3 months. And we know that that's also 1928. And then we fast forward a little bit to In this story, George was supposed to go to college after this trip, and he doesn't go. He sends his brother instead. So he stays once again, and then Harry returns after 4 years in college. So we can kind of glean that this is 1932. George is 25, and then later on in this part of the story, George marries Mary, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And then the film kind of glazes over the childbearing years and George and Mary having a family and all of that. And then we can roughly gather that when Mr. Potter gives George the job offer, Mr. Potter actually says, "You're 27, 28." So this is pretty much the start of George's Saturn return in 1934. And in that moment, Mary's pregnant, we find out later. So this is George's Saturn return is very much about continuing to stay, starting a family. They ultimately have 4 kids. So this is a very important part of the story, and kind of like where a lot of the themes brew that culminate in the second half of the movie, which is what we'll get to eventually as well. So the film is set on Christmas Eve in 1945. Once we get to the part that's live and George's current life story, pretty much the second half. So let's look at it through the lens of astrology. And first we'll start by looking at the characters and how they relate to specific zodiac signs and themes that I noticed. So we have George. This is a pretty classic snapshot of him in the luggage store where he says, "I wanted a big one." So that's a pretty classic moment and screenshot from that scene. George is absolutely the protagonist of this story. Mr. Potter is absolutely the antagonist of this story. He is a mean, rotten old man. And we'll get more into his character as well. And then we have beautiful Mary, who has loved George her entire life. And we'll get into what Mary represents as well. And then we have Clarence, the guardian angel, AS2, angel second class. And I kind of feel like the Bailey family in general is also a big, kind of like a character in the story too. Like I think that settings and places and other things can kind of take on the form of a character as well. So the Bailey brothers, the family lineage, the patrilineal line, like I said, and the building and loan in general, I think is also not just the setting, but also a character in the story. So the 3 signs that I feel are most prominently demonstrated and symbolized and portrayed in this film are Sagittarius, Cancer, and Capricorn. So we start with George and his dream. The entire time, we hear it time and time again throughout the entire film. I want to get out of this town. I want to explore. I want to have a harem and 3 wives. I want to have a suitcase big enough for, 101 things and decals from every country I visit. And he's always wanting to get out of Bedford Falls. He's always wanting to go on some adventure. He's always wanting to explore. The last thing he wants to do is stay there and become his father and work in a crummy little office. So I think George is a Sagittarius for these reasons. He's ambitious. He's a dreamer. He's got big goals, big aspirations, and all he wants to do is get away and see the world. He doesn't want to be held back by anybody or anything. And then we have Mary. Like I said, when you see the scene in the drugstore when they're kids, Mary's there at the counter. She's the one that George serves the ice cream. And she tells him that she'll love him till the day she dies. So Mary's been in love with George her entire life. All Mary wants to do is be there in Bedford Falls and pretty much marry and love George. So I feel like in that way, and for other reasons we'll get to, she definitely symbolizes the sign of Cancer. It's that maternal energy. Mary's the roots, Mary's the home. All she wants to do is make a beautiful home for him and have a family. And in a lot of ways, Mary's kind of coy and really smart and sassy too. So I feel like she matches George in a really complimentary and beautiful way because she's also a dreamer to an extent. And she has the same imaginative qualities that George does, but hers have a different intention. And then we have Mr. Potter. the evil, miserly, awful Mr. Potter. But he serves a purpose in this film as well, for sure, big time. And with his character, just think of Scrooge. I mean, this character carries forward in films in so many different ways, but a lot during like the holiday season, which is interesting because it is Capricorn. It is Saturnalia is another term for Christmas. So Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn, and we'll get into that more as well. But this is definitely the shadow side, like the power hungry person that just wants to control everything. He's called soulless. He's 100% dishonest and just mean, and definitely represents the shadowy side of the sign of Capricorn. And then we have the building alone. That's also more of a common association with the sign of Capricorn, the banking systems in general, finance, money, tradition. All these things are more commonly associated things that are part of the sign of Capricorn. To me, I feel like Clarence is more like, I see Capricorn as the sign of the mystic, and we'll get more into that as well. But Clarence is the guardian angel. Clarence is the one that gets called on to help, really to save George. And also he's got like a dual mission here as well. So I feel like in a lot of ways, he symbolizes the mystical side. He's on task as well, though. So if you look at the mystical side of Capricorn, you're still climbing a mountain to an extent. You're still definitely focused on your vision, focused on your mission. So Clarence brings that, and it's just that part of the element of Clarence in general, and the angels and heaven, where the scene opens and everything is just, I think, magical. So let's get into the planets and the symbols. And here's the angel gathering where the film begins. So we have the higher order of angels, and then Clarence joins them when he gets called upon to help. So Jupiter rules the sign of Sagittarius. Jupiter represents our expansion and just wanting to explore and be adventurous. And from a young age, George, all he wants is to win $1 million and to have $1 million and to go see the world, like I said. So he's a big dreamer. He wants to do something big and important. He says this a lot throughout the film. He wants to get out of the crummy town of Bedford Falls. He wants to build things big. Like, George is a big dreamer. But he's also extremely benevolent. And he's also a humanitarian. And he's incredibly generous and carries those qualities forward from his father. He's got an expansive imagination. He's always dreaming about something. So George's key challenges in this film are being inhibited in lots of ways, and we'll get to that. He's always trapped in Bedford Falls by something that happens or another. He's trapped, but ultimately he's trapped by his own choices. And I feel like George is the one, he is the oldest son. So he's the one that really bears the weight. He's the one that sort of, he does take on this in general eventually, but to really break the family patterns. And he just can't get out of Bedford Falls. So we have that element in Jupiter and George. And then I think, as well as representing the sign of Cancer, Mary is certainly the moon. There's a lot of references to the moon in this film. She's just a beautiful, beautiful woman. Look at this beautiful home that she creates out of the old Granville house that is pretty much a mess. They throw rocks at it in one scene in the very beginning. And it's just this beat up old place, but she feels that it's beautiful and has the sense of romance, and she's always wanted to live there. And this is the space that she wants to create for the family that she wants to have with George. So Mary is the nurturer. Mary's always, I think, being the light in this movie. I think not only, well, the moon is one of our luminaries, so the moon represents light to an extent anyway. But there's lots of full moons. Mary's always either around or wearing some kind of white flower. And she does work pretty hard when she's with George in the chance encounters, and then ultimately after they get married, to win him over. And she's got to deal with George's bullshit. He definitely has moments of feeling very down, feeling very melancholic, which is, it can be tendencies, in the sign of Capricorn as well. He definitely has episodes of anger. He's got a temper. When he feels like a failure towards the end of the film, he lashes out at everybody. And that's something that I feel like Mary ultimately handles really well in this movie, because she is the nurturer and the mother, and she's so loving and loves him so much, and her children and her family so much. But I feel like in a lot of ways, she rescues him often, especially at the very end. So she symbolizes the moon and also shows George the light. And then we have Mr. Potter. Definitely, like I said, serves a huge purpose in this film. But he's 100% the shadow side of Capricorn. He's 100% the shadow side of Saturn. Like I said, think Scrooge. All he wants is to dominate the entire town. All he wants is to put the Bailey brothers out of business over and over again. He tries and tries and tries. He wants to own everything. He overcharges for shacks. Like, he's just kind of a miserable old curmudgeon, like I put in the qualities part of this slide. Totally avaricious, definitely conniving, definitely manipulative, very cruel. And in the very beginning, when his chariot is being pranced down the street in the one scene, he's referred to as the richest and meanest man in the county. And you can see that too, in just the way that he sits at his desk in his wheelchair. Everyone's always sitting beneath him. It's a whole thing with him. So his biggest challenge is the Bailey family and the building and loan, and he refers to them as a boil on his neck. And then we have Clarence, the guardian angel. All he wants to do is fulfill his mission, primarily to help George and to rescue George, but also to win and earn his angel wings, which he hasn't had yet. And that's pretty much one of the first things he says to the other angels in the beginning is, if he does a good job with George, will he get to win his wings? And that's kind of where the famous line, or one of the famous lines from the movie comes. Every time a bell wings, an angel gets its wings. It's referring to Clarence's story and the references to that throughout the film as well. But he took on a really big job. And you can tell if you watch him through all the hemming and hawing he does with trying to show George the way. He definitely represents showing George the karma, but also being the teacher of the tough lessons. But he does this from a very beautiful place because he's the guardian angel and that's his job. So his biggest challenge when he comes in is to complete his mission, but also to help George. And in so doing, he gets to win or earn his wings. So there's a lot of symbolism throughout the entire film, like I said. The building alone itself, and I just to mention this too, I prefer the black and white version. When we watch the clip, it's going to be from the one with color, because that's the one I could find on YouTube. But I just love the black and white because I just feel like there's something novel about it. And I think it just adds to the story watching it in black and white. So the building alone actually has a resident raven, which is really interesting. And that's actually an animal that's associated with the sign of Capricorn as well as the planet Saturn. So there's that. And then when they're in kind of like towards the middle of the film, when their Bailey Park is built, there's actually a goat that gets into when they're presenting Mr. Martini with his house. And they're moving him from Potter's house to his house in Bailey Park. There's a goat that gets in the car with them, which is really interesting too, because that's another animal that's commonly associated with Saturn as well as the sign of Capricorn. The building alone itself, like I said, is a beautiful representation of the more commonly associated themes with the sign of Capricorn. And then this is a business that's been passed down from George's father, Peter, and his brother Billy, then to George, and George's hope is his brother, but that doesn't quite happen. But the patrilineal line is definitely here. And the film is set on Christmas Eve, which we know is in Capricorn season. And then we have the love story of George and Mary. And this night in particular the scene is from the night of Harry's graduation party. So we typically in the United States graduate high school in the month of June. So my best guess is that this is during Gemini season, and this is a Sagittarius full moon, which I feel like really pulls in those subtle Sagittarius themes in George, but also very much you see all the white flowers. Mary's in a white robe. It's just everything white, the white flowers throughout the film, pretty much, especially whenever there's a scene with Mary. It really symbolizes the moon and the sign of Cancer. And then we have the theme song, the Buffalo Gal song. They talk about dancing in the light of the moon. There's a lot of water involved with the rain, but also in the opening scene with the ice and the puddle, and also with the bridge scene when George dives in to save Clarence. There's just a lot of water kind of undercurrents going on with this film as well. And then just that whole beautiful part where he talks about Mary embodying the moon and he lassos it for her and that's his gift. Like there's just a lot of subtle themes with that and symbols with that as well. So then we have the additional symbols with the mystical side of Capricorn. So the movie really opens up with snapshots of the places where everybody's praying for George. So the whole thing is about divine intervention. Clarence incarnates because he has to be present in the George's life to really help him. There's only so much he can do from heaven. There's so much karma involved with this that I think is George's karma, but also kind of everyone's karma, but also generational karma that gets pulled in. And then we have the bridge between heaven and earth, which is represented by Clarence and the angels. So there's a lot on this slide, but I just wanted to make sure I covered pretty much, for anybody that's not really astro savvy, the commonly associated qualities with all of these signs, and then as well as some of the ones that I've come up with a little bit more on the mystical side of Capricorn. So we'll just go through these pretty quickly. I've already mentioned a lot of them, but with the moon's associated with our intuition, with our dreams, with our inner world, our inner landscape to an extent. It's usually with Cancer, especially, it's the only sign that's ruled by the moon. So we pull in empathy in this sign a lot. Emotional maturity is one of the ultimate goals with the sign of Cancer, and exposing your own vulnerability in order to get there is one of the biggest lessons. But just being the nurturer, being the mother, being very protective. The symbol is the crab, and the crab's body is a weapon after all. So there's that element that comes into play a lot with the sign of Cancer. Feelings of safety and security, and just being at home with oneself, but also your physical surroundings. There's also nostalgia that gets really associated and attached, I guess you could say, to the sign of Cancer. It's usually very sentimental, especially when it comes to family things. And like I said, the vulnerability for growth has to be there, I think, in order to, if you have Cancer placements, really kind of get to why you have those Cancer placements in general. And it's the mother and the maternal energy. And then on the other side of the sign of Cancer, this is a zodiac axis. We have Cancer and Capricorn are opposite each other. So this film really demonstrates the dynamic between the two throughout the entire story, through the characters, through the story, the symbols, all of it. So Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So we have pretty much the two Saturn-ruled signs are opposed by the two signs ruled by the luminaries, one being Cancer, and then the other one is Leo, which is ruled by the sun, which is interesting. So commonly associated achievement, climbing the mountain, developing skills, having a sense of authority. There's tradition and novelty that gets associated with Capricorn. So we have the nostalgia and being sentimental on the Cancer side, and then the tradition and novelty on the other side. Success systems, like I said, banks, mortgages, businesses, that kind of thing. Capricorn can also be a little isolating. Think of the goat on the top of the mountain, and when it gets up there, it's achieved so much and done all this stuff and was so practical about getting there and all the things and cautious, but it can be a little lonely at the top of that mountain. And because Cancer, so when the moon is in the sign of Capricorn, it's kind of what's said to be in fall when Saturn's in the sign of Cancer. So whenever we have these planets in the signs opposite, there's also another quality that gets pulled into the way that the planet functions. And then, like I said, Capricorn represents the father, the paternal energy. And then we get to the mystic. The symbol for Capricorn is not just the goat. It's actually a sea goat, which doesn't exist in nature at all. It's a completely mystical creature. And it very much represents, I think, the higher vibration of the sign. And that is, we have to dive into the depths of our own psyche in order to connect kind of who we are on a very subconscious and unconscious level and bring that into what we're doing here on this earth plane. So it connects water and earth very much. It definitely involves adaptability in order to navigate and kind of jump back and forth between the two, but also to tie those two together. And one of the things that I learned when I was teaching a class about Venus and Capricorn in particular was the symbol and the gift that I was given from Venus for that class was Mary Poppins. So Mary Poppins is a total authority figure. She's a nanny, but she also honors her whimsical side and her witch side. I mean, she is a witch. They say it in the movie. She blows in with the wind. So, but she's a boss. So I feel like that part, those things are really big parts of the sign as well. And just think of it too, like Saturn's the last visible planet to our eyes. So we know that there's so much beyond. So all we can really do without having concrete images or being able to really see them, I know we're given them, but not being able to see it with our own eyes, we only can imagine. So it takes a lot of kind of integration to get beyond the physical, I think. And in doing that, we get to own our own magic, which is a really cool aspect of the sign of Capricorn. So this is how the movie really demonstrates the axis of the two and how those themes are really pulled together. So based on the information that I gleaned and everything I presented so far, I decided it could be fun to come up with a natal chart for George Bailey. So like I said in the beginning, based on it saying in the early part of the film that he's 12 years old in 1919. He's born in 1907. I think he's a Sagittarius. So I made this chart for him just based on some other themes throughout that I've already talked about. But like, we'll do a little kind of hypothetical birth chart reading real quick for George to kind of relate all of these things to how his character is presented in the movie. So like I said, I think he's a Sagittarius. He's an explorer. The way that I work with natal charts always, whether it's for a person, a place, or a thing, is the most important thing is the planet. The next important thing is the house that the planet is in, and then the sign kind of flavors the whole experience. So George being a Sagittarius, George being an explorer and just wanting to get out and do things like that those are the themes of the ninth house of the natal chart. The sun loves to be in the space of the natal chart. So I just made George an Aries rising with the sun up here in this part of the chart. I thought it was also cool when I looked at this date to give him an Aries moon and make that in this space of his natal chart, because whenever we have a planet in this first house space, our job in this lifetime is to embody that energy. So I just feel like, and there's another thing that will play into this, but I just feel like George learns a lot from the moon. He references the moon a lot. He dreams with the moon. He, eventually, ultimately falls in love and marries Mary, who essentially is the embodiment of the moon. And she teaches him how to do this throughout the entire movie. I also thought that it was cool to have a pretty much exact square between Saturn and George's sun here. I just feel like whenever we have Saturn contacting a planet in our natal chart, in particular with George, a square, it's a challenge. This is a challenge to George's identity. This is a challenge to owning up to the responsibilities and his choices. This is forcing George to really realize who he truly is in a lot of ways. And I just feel like it's kind of cool that we have Saturn in Pisces right now astrologically, and it just so happened that in 1907 Saturn was also in Pisces. So I feel like this square is an important part of George's story. Now, the other thing that I found to be extremely cool is when I looked at the astrology of 1907 in general, the nodes of the moon are in Capricorn and Cancer. So with the nodes of the moon, that's essentially our soul's growth. It's our soul's life story. It's really what we came here to do. With the south node, which is this one horseshoe piece right here, it's very much the energy and information and experiences on a soul level that we incarnate with. This is our comfort zone to an extent. And then on the other side, it's our soul's growth. Always, they're always 180 degrees apart. So on the north node, which is this one right here in this fourth house space, it's in the sign of Cancer, which is interesting. And this is where we grow. So essentially, with this setup, if I were to do a mini natal chart reading for George, I would tell him that his job is to get in touch with the moon in particular, but also to come home to himself. Whenever we have the north node in this fourth house space, the story is usually finding home, planting roots. It's coming home to oneself ultimately, because this space of the chart relates very much to authentic self. And there's confusion around this for George. He's got the planet Neptune right here next to the north node. So whenever Neptune's involved, there's usually some kind of confusion. So he's just so always like, where am I supposed to be? I want to be out here exploring the world, but I'm stuck in this Bedford Falls, crummy town, in this stuffy office that I never wanted. But ultimately, in that whole experience, George is coming home to himself and being where he's really supposed to be and meant to be. Because, as we know through the story, he and the Bailey family and the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan Association is the only thing throughout the entire story stopping Mr. Potter from taking over, which I feel like really plays into this space of the chart as well. With the planet Uranus up here in the 10th house space, George ultimately is a pillar of the community, whether he wants to be or not. And he's a rebel. He's a revolutionary at heart, because every single time and time again, Aries moon, he's the brave one, he's the courageous one, he's the one that stands up to Mr. Potter. Even when he was 12 years old, he was a little boy, and he kind of Mr. Potter's insulting his father, and he stands up for his father, and he kind of like hits Mr. Potter in that scene and then walks out of the office. So just being the humanitarian also in this space, Uranus can also relate to that energy and community and building community and really finding love in this space, in just being there and being in the home space, in the nurture of Mary. I think that Mary is, like I said, a guiding light for him. And then with birth charts in particular, with the nodes, I learned and pull this forward into my own work that the ruler of the north node is kind of like the hero of the whole life story. And the moon rules the sign of Cancer, like I said. So the moon is really George's hero of his whole life story. And it's so involved in his journey as well. So that is my hypothetical natal chart for George. And then we look at what happens on the day in 1945 on Christmas Eve of what they call his crucial day or crucial night. We'll get into that as well. But it's interesting because he has, throughout that whole time, that time period leading up to that point, he has Saturn going through his fourth house space. He has Saturn going over his north node. And like I said, when Saturn's in the opposite sign that it rules, when it's in the sign of Cancer, there's an extra element, there's an extra lesson, there's an extra layer to how this functions. So having this whole metaphysical, mystical experience being part of what really helps him to see that he is and always has been exactly where he's supposed to be. With karma involved, Saturn's very much related to karma. Very, very, very interesting. Also, Saturn squaring his moon during this time, so George is forced to really see that he really was doing it all along in the right place. the lesson was always to embody this energy and kind of be the moon and be with Mary and have the family and all of it. So really, really interesting to kind of look at the hypothetical transits for what was happening during that time. Also, just a healing journey, being involved. It's said throughout the entire film that he's always thinking of other people, just like his father did. So that's one of the tendencies of the sign of Libra, is to put other before oneself. So we have all these planets in Libra opposing George's moon. So that always pulls in some kind of challenge or dynamic to how we feel, our feelings of safety and security as a person. And in the seventh house space of the chart, there's always something holding up a mirror. So there's a big mirror for George in this experience on this day, big time. And that's definitely part of George's healing journey as well. So there's other things that I can get into, but I don't want to get too bogged down in the astrology of it. But I just thought those are really cool things and synchronicities, especially with the Cancer Capricorn axis and this being his hypothetical natal chart and having those placements. So I've alluded to this, but let's kind of break down the repeating cycle for George. Like I said, time and time again, there's a chance for him to get out, to get away, and he's always faced with some kind of challenge, whether it's on a more subconscious level or something happens. It's always a crossroads. It's always a difficult decision. It's always stay or go. So the first one comes, and one of the cool things that, if that hypothetical natal chart is correct for George, the night of Harry's graduation, the night that he's 21, the night that his father dies, which is pretty much where he gets forced to not go on his European trip, where he pretty much doesn't go to college. Saturn would have been going over his son. So usually when we have something like that happen, it can involve something with our father. So his father dies on this night. And then we get to the scene after this where the whole board is meeting at the building and loan. It's 3 months later, they say in the movie. And Mr. Potter is there, and he wants to seize this time and this moment to just dissolve the building and loan. And the board kind of says, it's too close to Peter's death to really think about this, but George is there and he does not want to let this happen, but he also really wants to get his taxi and go to college. So he's again at some kind of crossroads, and he gets kind of put in a catch-22 situation. And this is all Mr. Potter's doing and Mr. Potter's design. And the opportunity is to save the building and loan, but George has to be appointed as a secretary and fill his father's position and step into his father's shoes. So George just cannot let Mr. Potter win. There's that Uranus in the 10th house space and that Aries moon and the underdog story, and he won't let that happen. So he chooses to stay, excuse me, and takes the money that was saved for him to go to college and gives it to his brother, and he sends his brother Harry off to college instead. So then we get, and his wish at this point in time is for Harry to come back from college and then take over the building and loan so then George can go to college. The other thing, the underlying part of the story that happens is the money was saved, like I said, for George, and George gives it to Harry. But Harry comes home from college and there's a big surprise. Harry's married. And nobody knew this until they step off the train together. Harry brings his new wife, Ruth, home with him and surprises everyone, George and his Uncle Billy, who met them at the train, with this news. And Ruth's father has offered Harry a job. So George sees his next opportunity to get out of Bedford Falls and to get out of the building and loan disappear, with the decision to let his brother go, essentially, and not take over the building and loan and not take the job offer that is pretty much in alignment with what he went to college for anyway. And George chooses to stay. And then we see George and Mary's wedding day happen in the film. Shortly after, we see Harry come home, and he finally gets another chance to get out, to go see the world. They had this $2,000 and this big dream to go on this honeymoon. and there's a rush on the bank. And there's a chance that the building alone will not survive this as well. So once again, he gets pulled in, he gets sucked in, he chooses to get sucked in. When Mary's like, no, let's just go. They stay, they use their kitty fund for their honeymoon, the $2,000, to save the business and to keep all their customers. And it's a beautiful scene. And Mary really saves the day. She's the one that offers up the money. So once again, George stops Mr. Potter, but he has to stay in Bedford Falls, and he has to stay with the building alone. So then we fast forward to what I talked about before, where Mr. Potter is saying, George, you're 27, 28 years old. And then at this point in time, Mr. Potter really manipulates George. Mr. Potter's ultimate goal always is to take everything over, to get rid of the building alone, get the little boil on his neck out of the picture completely. And this is a really manipulative, pretty awful scene on Mr. Potter's part, one of the many. And he calls George and invites him in and offers him a job with a great salary, with opportunities for travel and the biggest house in town and all the things. And pretty much once George shakes Mr. Potter's hand, he wipes it off on his coat and walks out and pretty much gives him the middle finger without really giving him the middle finger, because he realizes what Mr. Potter was trying to do. And then he gets home and finds out that Mary's pregnant. So he could have taken the job offer. He could have let all the weight on his shoulders that's been building the entire time go. He chooses not to. Mr. Potter doesn't win again. And now George is pretty much a dad at this point. And the film kind of fast forwards. They have 3 more kids. They have 4 kids total. And he says to Mary at one point during one of the kind of like the love scenes where she's trying to get him, like, I don't want to be married. I don't want to be held down by anything or anybody. I want to do what I want to do. And here he's now tied down in a big way because they have kids. So that's George's Saturn return. That's the choice he makes that kind of leads up to the entire rest of the story. So then we have World War II starts. Harry goes off to war. George can't because he's got the bad ear from the time when he saved his brother's life. And they call it the Battle of Bedford Falls, that George stays and fights. And he's just fulfilling his role even more as the pillar of the community, kind of the savior, the savior of the town. So he stays once again. He can't even go off to war, which is sort of like another catch-22. And then we have the crucial night. And we'll get into that. But essentially, what happens is Harry's coming back from war. Harry gets awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And this is the setting. This is the Christmas Eve on 1945, what the angels refer to as George's crucial night. And it's all over the paper. It's the headline. The town's planning this huge party, this parade for Harry. They're so excited. They're so proud of him as a town. George is so proud as his brother. Billy's so proud as this uncle. And there's an $8,000 deposit that needs to be made. Excuse me. That Uncle Billy, in his excitement, accidentally folds up in the newspaper that he then gives back to Mr. Potter when he's at the bank, preparing the deposit to be made. And we see throughout the film in the character building for Billy, he's forgetful. He's a little bit of a drunk. He's, borderline a little nuts, a little nutty. And this happens. And Mr. Potter has the opportunity to give the money back, and he decides not to. So George finds out about this in the midst of trying to talk to his brother and have the celebration. Billy calls him into his office, tells him what happened. He thinks he lost it. He has no idea that he folded it up in the newspaper. So this entire time, Mr. Potter has the $8,000. And Mr. Potter chooses to be a huge antagonist, fulfilling the role of all the things that kind of culminate after this point. And this is how George's crucial night unfolds. George is beside himself. He feels like a total failure. He knows that what happens, the bank examiner's there, they're going to be short on their accounts payable because the money is lost. And he's so livid with his uncle. He insults him, and then he goes home and he takes it out on his entire family, Mary, his kids, everybody. He pretty much snaps at everybody there in his path. He's pretty much on a war path at this point because he just feels like he's failed, but he's also kind of dwelling on the past and all the times he didn't get to go away and leave. And now it's all here in this moment where he might go to jail for his uncle's mistake. And he gets to a point where he leaves the house. He goes to the bar, he gets drunk. Everyone is praying for him because they just know that he's in this crucial moment. He regrettably, pretty much on his hands and knees, goes begging to Mr. Potter for help. And Mr. Potter, hiding the money, knowing that he's the one that has it, proceeds to accuse George of mishandling funds, accuse George of pretty much embezzlement, and ultimately calls the cops on George and wants to have him arrested. So Mr. Potter sees this as his ultimate chance to put George down and away, dissolve the business, and as his opportunity to finally take over everything. And there's the part of the scene that's the crux of the whole part that happens next is the only thing George has to his name, because the building loan is generally a charity for the town. They don't make any money off of their business. They pretty much just take care of everybody. He has a life insurance policy. And he says that it's worth $15,000. Mr. Potter puts it into perspective in black and white terms that it's really only worth $500 because that's all the equity that George has. And Mr. Potter convinces George that he is worth more dead than alive. So this is where we get to the scene where George is on the bridge and he's thinking about jumping in and committing suicide because he just feels so small after everything and he feels like a failure, and it's just gotten to this point for him. So this is the moment that Clarence incarnates, and Clarence is on the bridge with him, but George doesn't know it. Clarence jumps in the water, and for the second time in his life, George jumps into the cold water to save somebody, and this time it's Clarence. So in these moments that kind of happen after, we know that George wishes that he was never born, and Clarence knows that in this moment that he has to show George what life would be like without him if he were never born. So I have a 7-minute clip that I want to share. I had a longer one planned, but I couldn't play it for some reason through Zoom and through my Prime account, which is where I have the movie saved. So we're going to watch 7 minutes of kind of this part of the movie where George is just, he feels like he's taking crazy pills at this point because Clarence is showing him what the town and what life in the town and all the people that George loves and knows what things would be like if he were never born, if he didn't exist. So let's go to that. I have it on YouTube. So cozy up, take a moment, and let's watch this, and then we'll get back into the material. Hope you all can hear that.
Mary! Mary! Tommy! Petey, Janie, Susan, where are you?
They're not here, George. You have no children.
Where are they? What have you done?
All right, put up your hands. No fast moves. Come on out here, both of you.
Bert! Thank heaven you're here.
Back there.
Bert, what's happened to this house? Where's Mary? Where's my kids?
Watch him, Bert.
Now,
Bert,
come on,
Ernie,
come on.
what's the matter with you two guys? Hey, you were here on my wedding night. You both of you stood out there on the porch and sung to us. Don't you remember?
I think I better be going.
Look, now, why don't you be a good kid and we'll take you into a doctor. Everything's going to be all right. Now,
Bert,
come
now
on.
listen to it. Ernie, will you take me over to my mother's house?
Sure,
Bert, listen, it's that fellow there. He says he's an angel. He's trying to hypnotize
I hate
me.
to do this
Bert,
to you,
listen
bud, but...
to me. Bert!
Ow! Run, George! Run, George!
Ow! Joseph! Help!
Oh, shut up!
Help! Oh, Joseph! Joseph!
Where'd he go? Where'd he go? I had him right here.
I need a drink.
Well, which way did he go? Help me find him.
Well,
Mother.
Mother, what do you want?
Mother, this is George. I thought sure you'd remember me.
George who? If you're looking for a room, there's no vacancy.
Listen, please help me. Something terrible's happened to me. I don't know what it is. Something's happened to everybody. Please let me come in and keep me here until I get over it.
Get over what? I don't take in strangers unless they're sent here by somebody I know.
What? Well, I know everybody you know. What, your brother-in-law, Uncle Billy.
You know him?
Well, sure I do.
When'd you see him last?
Today, over at his house.
It's a lie. He's been in the insane asylum ever since he lost his business. And if you ask me, that's where you belong.
Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. And when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?
I've heard of things like this. You got me in some kind of a spell or something. Well, I'm going to get out of it. I'll get out of it. And I know how, too. Now, the last man I talked to before all this stuff started happening to me was Martini.
You know where he lives?
Well, sure I know where he lives. He lives in Bailey Park.
Are you sure this is Bailey Park?
No, I'm not sure of anything anymore. All I know is this should be Bailey Park. But where are the houses?
You weren't here to build them. Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9.
That's a lie. Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man on that transport.
Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Clarence,
Yes, George?
where's Mary?
Oh, well, I can't...
I don't know how you know these things, but tell me, where is she? If you know where she is, tell me where my wife is.
I'm not supposed to tell.
Please, Clarence, tell me where she is.
You're not going to like it, George.
Where is she?
She's an old maid. She never married.
Where is Mary? Where is she? Where is she?
She's just about to close up the library. Oh, there must be some easier way for me to get my wings.
Mary. Mary! 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 Mary, it's George. Don't you know me? What's happened to us?
I don't know. You let me go.
Mary, please. Oh, don't do this to me. Please, Mary. Help me. Where's our kids? I need you, Mary. Help me. Mary, Mary, let me go. Let me go. Let me go.
Chasing me. He's gonna stop him.
Tom. Ed. Charlie. That's my wife.
Let me go.
Mary.
Now you don't. Somebody call the police. Somebody hit him on the head with a bottle. You need a straight jacket. Come on.
Clarence. Get out of here. Clarence. me, Clarence! Get me back! Get me back! I don't care what happens to me! Get me back to my wife and kids! Help me, Clarence, please! Please! I want to live again! I want to live again! I want to live again!
So then that George's prayer for himself is answered, and he gets to live again after having that terrifying experience of being shown what everything would be like if he wasn't born, if he didn't exist. As you could see, the town was called Pottersville, not Bedford Falls, and there was depravity everywhere, and the people were totally different. There were strip clubs and just all kinds of bars and alcohol, and there's more to it when you actually watch the full scene. But he gets shown for real and gets to actually experience what it would be like, and has a huge change in perspective, which, according to A Course in Miracles, is a miracle. So a miracle happens, and George changes his tune completely, and then as the film ends, he goes home. He just loves on everyone. He's just so grateful for everything. He's even grateful for his bloody mouth and his rotten car that he crashed into a tree before all this happens, when he's driving drunk to the bridge. And everyone that he ever helped comes to help him. And this is not only because of pretty much the karma, I think, that's involved in this, but also Mary makes a lot of calls after George leaves the house after he had his episode. So she really does save the day. And then that kind of gets paid forward to other people that come in, even people that aren't there in, other countries, that wire George money, and the whole town comes together. And it's said at one point that they have to have faith in each other. They have to come together as a community to essentially stop Mr. Potter, and to just show like the human spirit and the thing that George's father embodied, and the thing that, George really does embody, but he just doesn't see it until he's shown. So at the end, the people win. George is given more than enough to save the business, to keep himself out of jail. The police officer that was there waiting for him actually tears up the warrant for his arrest and throws it into the pile. The bank examiner even ends up giving him money. So it's a very happy ending. It's a very Merry Christmas. The people win, the community wins. And it's said in the end that George, by his brother, that George is actually the richest man in town, and Clarence earns his wings. So it's a very happy ending, like I said. And then throughout the part that Clarence is incarnate, he's carrying around the book Tom Sawyer, and that actually gets left on the table. And this is the inscription. When George reads this, I think that it really all hits home for him. And then the bell rings on the Christmas tree, and he knows that for sure that Clarence got his wings. So that is my presentation for this, and I would like to shift into a little discussion and Q&A if you all are up for it, who are here with me live. And we can turn on your video if you want. We can just come off mute and talk about what I presented and anything that you may have noticed or learned through looking at this from the lens of astrology.
Well, I was quite interested in the Saturn lessons because I never knew about those. And it's now my question is it like when you said like 30, is it like the 30s, that whole decade, or is it just that 30 year where the
So
lesson is?
the 30 years when the planet returns. And then I kind of feel like our entire 30s is integration of our Saturn return. And that would be
Okay.
60s as well. So you have your second one at 60.
When I,
Yeah.
is there a lead up to this lesson usually?
Usually a few years before it'll start to brew.
Oh, very interesting.
Yep.
Because when I was 59, around there, 58, 59. Well, it started at 56 when I found out I was a grandmother to a 14-month-old that had been taken away from the mother for failure to thrive, was in foster care, and my son didn't know he was the father.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So at 56, I had an infant that came to me weighing 17 pounds, and I was working full time. So I had her for a year and a half. And then my son got his shit together and um, they moved out. So here I had this infant that literally we shared a room together. And I mean, she was still bottle feeding, when I got her and everything. So she left. Shortly after she left, the house that we had was an apartment building. And that's a whole nother story how we ended up with the house. But we had been there for 25 years. And the town was it was just getting hard to get reliable tenants. So we ended up losing the house. We had to give it back to the bank 2 years after Chloe. And then, so yeah, so starting at 60, we moved out of that house. I think I said this before, and the house was like 5 houses down from the school I worked at. So I had to drive by it twice a day too. And I hated where I lived. And that started a move until we finally got here in 2019. But it's interesting how my whole 60s, because in March I will be 70. And so my whole 60s has been all about adulting.
Again.
It was like, again, well, it gave me a second chance. However, even though I wasn't sober, I was in a different frame of mind. But it eventually pushed me over the edge to the point where I really had to do something. You talk about what happened back in 2017. Well, that was when I called 911 so I didn't kill myself, and I ended up in the hospital, and that's when I got sober. So yeah, I'm like, wow. And so it's very interesting because now I'm going into the 70s and I feel like my adulting is over. All my adulting is over, and I don't know how the hell I got here. I'm sliding into my last slice of pie. um, and that, I don't know what that's all about yet. I'm getting glimmers of it, but I think it's a lot of it's the fruits of integration and sharing them. I think that our last slice of, I guess I call it my final thesis. This is my final thesis. So yeah, if you really care about it, because like you said, which I thought was very interesting too, was how people get stuck at 27 because they have the Peter Pan boy and girl syndrome, that they don't want to grow up. They don't want responsibility. And I think we have we have like maybe 2 generations of that right now. I mean, I tried educating a couple of them. It was not easy. So if I'm off at all, please correct me. I'm just going with, because
You're not
I
at all,
know
Denise.
I am an astrology novice. However, while this was all going, I got out, I love this book, although I hate it as well. It's called Astrology for the Soul by Jan Spiller. And I was looking at, because there was a lot of this Capricorn stuff, and I have a Capricorn North node, which sucks. Being a
Ah,
Pisces, and I'm a Pisces. So having a Capricorn North node, and I'm reading all, it says attributes to develop and tendencies to leave behind, and it is so right on, and I don't like it at all.
that's how the North Node can feel. But also, Denise, so you've got Saturn kind of coming up on your sun because Saturn's in the sign of Pisces right now. So that's like an extra layer, big layer of
Of
that
what?
whole identity piece and sobriety. Saturn usually brings a heavy dose of reality and sobriety as well. So you're doing fantastically with everything that you shared and the choices that you've made. You've pretty much rescued yourself.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm so fucking tired.
And that's
I'm,
okay.
excuse my language, and I'm like, and I feel like I'm stuck in this. I gotta perform, you know, uh, and then I get scared in my survival thing, and then I don't know. I'm in a really tough spot right now. I want to isolate, and yet I want to share. I want to hide, but I can't because I feel a responsibility. I have felt this responsibility since I was a child, but I don't know what the responsibility is. That's the thing. I'm sitting with it all. I've just been. Have you speaking of movies, have you seen the movie Cider House Rules? Did you ever see Cider House Rules?
One time, that's heavy on abortion, isn't it?
Yes. But there was one because what's his name there who loved the girl that was pregnant, and he didn't know what was going to go on with them. It was like he was always in, I'm just waiting and seeing. I'm just waiting and seeing. And that's where I'm at. I'm since September. There's been huge, and you've known me since September, Ursula. Since September, it's been a sludge of like the week my husband went to Wales was the best it's been since that time. Other than that, it's been so I'm just riding the wave. And Jackie, I see you there going.
For sure.
Oh God. I took extra calcium so I can know when I fall off my surfboard, I don't break my leg. Oh
Thank
my
you for sharing,
God.
Denise. I think that you were doing beautifully. The whole thing is to
Oh,
not get to the George Bailey crucial moment.
no, I was there in 2017.
Yeah, let's not get
I
there
was
again.
No, no, we don't want to go there. And
Mm-mm.
it was very interesting during that whole time. My Clarence, excuse me, my Clarence was Pink and John Legend, and the song "Don't Give Up."
Mm.
Every freaking time I would turn on the radio or I would put on Pandora on TV, that song would come on, and that I knew. So yeah, so I've had Clarence show up in different versions several times in my life.
Mm.
But that one I definitely recognized as such. Jackie, please say something.
Sorry. My brain, I got major brain fog today. I'm about to get my period, but I will see what comes together. I feel so much of what you're saying, Denise. Uh Especially like the wanting to hide, but also feeling that you have to be seen. I've also felt that for a very long time, and I just really want to hide right now too. With the Saturn transits have always been very intense for me. Just knowing for the like past 4 or 5 years and learning more, but looking back throughout my whole life and having Saturn in my first house, conjunct my moon is a very strong energy that I'm learning to work with, and learning to understand that Saturn in the first house is the late bloomer, which definitely feel that.
It's the Benjamin Button.
Yeah, I'm just like I just came across that just recently, so I was like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. Because then on top of it, and also I love Astrology for the Soul. I love that I'm a Leo North Node, so but that's a great book. But yeah, it's and then now going through, like, my Saturn return was the first time I really got sober. I had no idea that it was, that was my Saturn return at the time, but that I was in AA for probably about a 6-month period, and then I did start drinking again for a little while after that. But then shortly after, I was sober for full 2 years, and then I was still bartending at the time, so I did start drinking again. Definitely not as I used to drink Jameson like water, so and try to prove how Irish I was. So, anyways, that never worked out for me. But yeah. So, and then now, but I definitely did. It definitely put me on track, and I did get, even though I was bartending, I was very serious about work and working as much as I possibly could and paying my bills and just really adulting. That's for the first time. But and then now it's definitely confusing now, because though it's not exact for I think like another year or so, with the Uranus opposition and then the Saturn opposition as well, is definitely interesting, going back and recalling high school years between 14 and 16, and it's definitely highlighting again like the controversy and issues with my parents, because I don't know, it's a lot of similarities and a lot more issues with them again. So yeah, but I just love astrology, and I love all the connections you made with the movie. It's great, and I look forward to even more, because I love movies and I love astrology. So yay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for sharing. And there's other nuances in just hearing you talk, like when Saturn goes over our moon, that's a whole thing as well. So having that happen at the same time as the Saturn return, I also experienced that myself in my first Saturn return. Like that's just an extra intense rewrite of everything on so many levels. So I feel you, and I can relate to that as well. It's a very sobering experience in many ways, whether that's, just think of any of the things, like Saturn's metal is lead, the lessons are heavy. Like I said, it's like getting called to the principal's office, but ultimately we all want to come out like George did, just having our eyes wide open and a clean slate and a new version of ourselves to an extent.
I'm sick of being called to the principal's office. I've been called to the freaking principal's office my whole damn life. And I'm telling you what, if any of my teachers knew that I had been in education for 30 years, they would have dropped dead. I swear to God, because I was the least likely of anyone in that class to ever, ever be involved in education. I was the only one. No one ever asked me to babysit, ever, ever. I mean, ah, I was the oh no that wanted to be an oh boy that settled for an oh well when she walked in the room. Yeah. It's interesting how life works, you know, because I'm going to tell you what, you can't judge a book by its cover because you never know. I had a person one time, I wish I could find them again and have them explain the analogy to me because it was just so perfect. And I can see it in my mind's eye. And it goes along with the conditioning, you know, when we're born, we automatically are given a name, a religion, you know, we're given belief, a belief system, a should master, and, you know, and I forgot where I was going with this. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. You were just pretty much started by saying you're tired of getting called to the principal's office.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I just hope, I just hope, I know when one of us croaks, either myself or my, you know, the croaking phase is getting closer in my end of life, you know, in this part of my life. So I'm sure I still have some lessons to learn. I just hope that I've got the chutzpah to get through it with grace and dignity. So
I think you do, Denise.
I have a question on another subject though.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the Facebook page. When it gets closer to the workshop, can I post a few things, a couple of messages on there?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I didn't want to do anything without asking first. Because I kind of want to get people thinking so that when we do have the workshop, that it's more of an exchange. And because I'm pretty much thinking that if people don't have they I would like them to have an idea of their intentions, and even if they write them after the workshop in their own solitude or whatever, that the whole workshop itself will be just more of like a processing and helping with that. So I just kind of wanted to grease the pump a little bit before.
Yeah.
And then because so people are thinking, you know, and pondering beforehand. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And I appreciate all the work you did with this because it shows that you took a lot of time to do this with the slides, and I'm sure you had to watch that movie several times to, you know, and replay and go back, and yeah, so I appreciate all the effort you put into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for noticing that. It was my pleasure, though. Like I said, I'm just so excited. It's one of my favorites. So, yeah, and I'm sure doing the first one, I've gotten my feet wet and greased the wheel, like you said. So there will be definitely more Star Lounges in the future. I already have ideas brewing on so many other movies and stuff. So, thank you both for being a part of this first one, and anyone
Well,
watching in the future.
well, and the thing of it is that it's nice to look at look at the characters and how it's like seeing their astrology and how the astrology is working in the character's life, it kind of makes you think to yours, because like when you were talking, I was because of Capricorn, and I went and got the book, which I have to read all of. I'm not going to do it tonight, damn it. um yeah, just get you thinking about things. And that's always a good thing. It's always a good thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. And I think we'll conclude there and just hang on for one moment. I'm going to stop the recording, but I just want to hang on for 1 minute. If I can find the button. Yep, there we go.